Hey guys, Dwyer here, bringing you my shorties. What are those? Well, you see, usually my lecture's hour long. Okay, sure, you can set the time for that and watch the whole thing. What about people who are on the go, maybe don't have a lot of time? Well, I think this series is going to be for you because sometimes I have in mind that I want to do a specific topic, but I can't find an hour long of stuff to cover on it. That's where this is going to go. That's where this is going to go. Typically, here's the format. I'm going to take something old, a variation, a Joseki, an opening, whatever. I'm going to take that old thing, I'm going to show it, explain maybe a little bit why we don't see it anymore, and then we'll show something new that's taken its place, and a little bit of why we see that. Again, can cover a whole range of different topics, but I'm going to have one topic per video. But do know that just because I'm showing something old doesn't mean it's no good and shouldn't be played anymore. It's just something that we're not seeing quite so much, and what we've been seeing a lot in its place. That's it. It's just sort of a, okay, so that's got possibility too. Kind of that feel to it. So I hope you guys enjoy this video. Let me know if you do, and if you don't, well, let me know that too, I suppose. Drop comments down below. I'll be reading them. Alright, so this time, let's go over an old Joseki and compare it with something that we are playing a little bit more modern nowadays. Let's start off with a relatively normal looking game where we have something nice and simple. Someone takes a 3-4 point, you decide to approach nice and high, and a very, very, very normal and common response to this is a 2-space high pincer. Now, back when I first began teaching, it was extremely common to play the large knight. And even nowadays, we are still seeing this. This is still perfectly fine. But the result of this is not what we see nowadays. Because even if you don't know Joseki, you can easily find these moves. You can easily find leaning on the stone. You can easily decide to keep separated, because very basic rule set everyone knows. Let's keep our opponent's stones separated when we can. Same thing, let's keep separated and try and connect to ours. White, of course, is going to say, no, you cannot do that. I'm going to continue to keep you separated, at which point it's time to get shape. And that move right there, that seemingly normal move that everyone would probably play on reflex, is actually the old variation. Because you see, this leads to very, very, very large amounts of complication. Because white will typically go and try to get base for himself. Black obviously slides into the corner. Don't want to lose our stones, so we connect. At which point, the problem arises that if we play the most normal looking stones possible, we wind up with this cut point here for black. White is, of course, going to immediately take it, and we cannot say from this position that we are simply going to give him away and let this connect up. This is bad. You can see right here, 2 stones of blacks are in serious trouble because these lines of stone for white are pretty strong. Plus, we have a wonderful, wonderful follow-up of this attachment, giving white a very solid wall here. So all of this is going to be influenced, some of this is going to be influenced. Weak group has been created for black. This stone, gonna just have to forget about that, I suppose, while all we're doing is living in the corner. So we cannot play this way as black. So what we usually do instead is Atari down, leading to even greater complication. Now, right away, how I am describing this, pointing out that it's very, very complicated, can immediately have you understanding why this is not played so much anymore. I mean, sure, it's a lot of fun to discover variations and play through new ones, but once you realize just how much of the board they influence, well, maybe you want to play something a little bit simpler as to not clutter up the entire board quite so much, as you're about to see here. Because in this variation, it relies completely on the ladder. which you've already noticed. There you go. That's a Joseki for you. Unfortunately, this one seems to be going towards black, so these stones are not going to die. In fact, black would never play this way if that stone was not his. So what winds up happening now is we need ladder breaker. So not only has this fourth of the board been taken up by one variation, but now as we fight over this stupid ladder breaker, this part of the board is going to be taken up. So because of one Joseki, one little Joseki, we have actually almost resolved half the board. So the question becomes, what are some more modern variations as opposed to playing things like this? Well, for that answer, we return back to this position. And like I mentioned, this is a very, very easy way to get yourself in a lot of trouble because you play something that looks very, very standard but results into what we saw later. So instead of that, we're actually seeing this attachment instead, trying to avoid at all costs going into that ladder variation again. Now, white can try and go back into that because maybe these stones are reversed. No, maybe these stones are reversed. There we go. Maybe the upper right-hand corner is whites instead of blacks. So maybe white actually wants you to get into the variation because you don't have the ladder. But even if you have the ladder or don't have the ladder, you can completely understand why you wouldn't want to play this. And what we see instead is the Hane. This Hane ensures that what we saw previously cannot be played. If you were to mistakenly respond this way, as opposed to the Hane underneath, then you could wind up back in that variation that you don't want. But if we play here, well, I suppose white has to cut now, and black will of course save stone. And then white can block, and we get a free Atari as black. Now, one thing we're not going to do is connect this, because if we connect this, white gets to be happy. White gets to completely surround you, and it looks like it might even be Sente, because we don't want this to occur, right? Because now that eye is false. So living in the corner is a little bit of an issue, let's say. So we don't want to play this way. That would be really, really bad. So instead, we're going to Atari, because that makes the most sense. At which point, white will extend. And now, normally, black is not going to want to be surrounded. So typically speaking, we're going to generally see an extension on out of here. Let's go ahead and change these corners around. Maybe white actually has a spot of influence here for some reason. Well, then can just as easily play for influence. It means giving up more territory towards black, of course, but it is something that can be done. As you can see here, if the board is actually fit for it. Another very common variation here, blocking here immediately. Well, in that case, can Atari easily enough. No problems there. White will have to connect or lose the stone. Don't want to do that. We still don't want to go back and play here because this cut is still very much an issue. So rather than that, we can just as easily defend. White can take. And from here, get rid of that. And from here, depending on the board, greatly determines what you might want to play next. I mean, both players are happy in this particular result, because we can see that both sides are pretty much stable for the moment. Both sides are out, obviously. Both sides have potential for what they can play next. It's a fairly even result, and both players are generally happy with this. I do want to warn that there is a lot of aji lingering here. For example, this can get troublesome later on, depending on how the rest of the game goes, because this is not a move that you want to ignore, given if you ignore it, then we can no longer make two eyes locally, right? Because we can now poke that out. So this descent here might very well be Sente, so white has to be careful if the decision is made to maybe build up upon this area in a large manner. Because moves such as this may very well wind up being Sente. Now another very common variation for those who've actually studied Joseki might actually be Dahane on this side. Responses are pretty much straightforward. The Atari, and unless you're very much mistaken, we do not do this. If you do this, you have made error. This is a done goof. Because you can see white can either take his corner back or even aggressively Atari you to eliminate your eyes. This would be a bad situation to be in. So we would not do that. That is clearly a bad. There we go. So instead, this is an instance where we will actually go ahead and connect. White can either cut through here or play here. The situation is pretty much the same. Now in this instance, black has Sente to play elsewhere. This isn't too much of a threat. We can take this and still live. The Sente is actually worth it. So that's another common variation that we sometimes see. So if you are the kind of person who's been getting into this two-space pincer a lot, and you've been playing maybe the very, very complicated Joseki, just because maybe you don't know any other variations, well, now maybe you've got a couple more that you can add to your repertoire, and experiment with those, perhaps not cluttering up the board, quite so much as you have been doing. So I hope you enjoyed this, and you have a few more variations to add to your game.